Today, we're talking about everything Jessi Draper revealed about her ex-husband during her appearance on Call Her Daddy, because this interview has sparked a lot of conversation, especially among people who follow the Mormon Wives influencer world. Jessi Draper is someone who built a following by sharing her life in a space that many people associate with the polished and idealized image of a Mormon wife. But in this interview, she opened up in a way that completely changed that image. Instead of showing the perfect family, the perfect marriage, and the carefully curated lifestyle that people often expect from influencers in that world, Jessi chose to talk about something much darker and much more serious. She spoke about the emotional abuse she says she experienced during her marriage, and that decision has hit people hard. What makes this story so powerful is that it's not just another influencer sharing relationship drama. It's not just gossip. It's not just a breakup story. What Jessi described was something much deeper. She talked about gaslighting, manipulation, emotional control, and the long process of realizing that what was happening behind closed doors was not normal and was not healthy. That's why this interview stands out. It challenges the image that so many people have of Mormon wives, and the influencer culture built around that identity. For a lot of people, that phrase brings to mind beautiful homes, smiling families, faith-based values, supportive husbands, and marriages that seem almost too perfect to be real. But Jessi's story pulls back the curtain and reminds people that the image people see online is not always the full truth. That's one of the biggest reasons this interview has created such a strong reaction. Social media has made it very easy for people to package their lives into something aspirational. A family can look perfect in photos. A couple can look happy in videos. A home can look peaceful and warm and ideal in every post. But none of that automatically means the relationship is healthy. Jessi's story is a reminder that even the most polished public image can hide private pain. And when someone who has been part of that picture-perfect world decides to speak openly about emotional abuse, it forces people to look at that entire image differently. At the center of this conversation is Jessi's decision to talk publicly about emotional abuse, and that matters because emotional abuse is often misunderstood or minimized. A lot of people still think abuse only counts when it's physical. They think of visible injuries, loud arguments, or obvious signs that something is wrong. But emotional abuse doesn't always look like that. It can be quiet, it can be subtle, it can happen slowly over time. It can be built out of repeated patterns of control, blame, confusion, and manipulation that wear someone down until they no longer trust themselves. That's what makes emotional abuse so difficult to explain and so difficult to recognize, even for the person living through it. Jessi describes specific examples of the emotional abuse she says she experienced, including gaslighting and manipulation. Those words get used a lot online, but in situations like this, they're not just trendy labels. They describe very real behaviors that can seriously damage someone's sense of reality. Gaslighting is not just lying or disagreeing. It's a pattern of making someone doubt what they saw, what they felt, what they remember, and even what they know to be true. Over time, that can create deep confusion. A person starts questioning their own instincts. They start wondering if they're too emotional, too sensitive, too dramatic, or simply wrong. That's part of why emotional abuse is so powerful. It doesn't just hurt in the moment. It changes the way someone thinks about themselves. According to Jessi, her ex-husband allegedly used these kinds of behaviors to control the emotional environment of the relationship. When someone is constantly being told that their memory is wrong, that their feelings are irrational, or that they're overreacting, it creates a cycle. The victim begins to second-guess everything. They replay conversations in their head. They wonder if they misunderstood. They apologize even when they're not sure what they did wrong. They may start to feel like peace only comes when they stay quiet, or go along with whatever the other person says. That's what makes emotional abuse so dangerous. It's not always one huge event. Often, it's a repeated pattern that slowly chips away at a person's confidence and clarity. One of the most important things Jessi's story highlights is how hard it can be to recognize emotional abuse while you're still inside it. That's something people on the outside often don't understand. They ask questions like, why didn't she leave sooner? Or how did she not realize? But those questions ignore the nature of manipulation. The confusion is part of the abuse. If someone has spent months or years making you doubt yourself, making you feel responsible for their behavior, and convincing you that your reactions are the real problem, it becomes incredibly hard to trust your own judgment. You may know something feels wrong, but you may not have the language for it. You may feel trapped, but still think maybe the issue is you. That's why stories like Jessi's matter. They help people understand that emotional abuse is not always obvious, especially to the person going through it. Another reason this interview has resonated so strongly is because of the pressure to maintain appearances. In communities where marriage and family are deeply valued, there can be a huge amount of pressure to keep everything looking fine, even when it's not. Whether that pressure comes from religion, culture, social media, family expectations, or internal beliefs, it can make it much harder for someone to admit that their relationship is unhealthy. For influencers, that pressure can be even more intense. If your platform is built around family life, marriage, motherhood, and domestic happiness, then telling the truth about a harmful relationship can feel like blowing up your entire identity. Jessi's story challenges that pressure. It says that the image is not more important than the truth. And that's why this is bigger than just one relationship. Jessi's interview doesn't just reveal painful details about her ex-husband. It also raises larger questions about influencer culture and the way social media rewards perfection. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok are built for polished moments. They reward aesthetics, consistency, positivity, and aspirational lifestyles. But real life is not always clean, beautiful, and simple. Real life can be messy. Real life can be painful. Real life can involve serious problems hiding behind curated content. Jessi speaking out reminds people that what they see online is often only one version of reality, and sometimes it's the version that hides the most. One of the most striking parts of her interview was the moment she talked about finally realizing what was happening. That kind of realization is often one of the hardest parts of emotional abuse. For many survivors, there isn't always one dramatic incident that makes everything clear. Sometimes it's a slow build-up. Sometimes it's a conversation with a trusted friend. Sometimes it's therapy. Sometimes it's hearing someone else describe a similar experience and suddenly recognizing your own. Sometimes it's reading about gaslighting or manipulation and realizing that's exactly what I've been living through. Whatever that moment looked like for Jessi, it clearly represented a turning point. It was the moment where confusion started turning into clarity. And that clarity can be painful. Realizing you were being emotionally abused often means looking back on your relationship and seeing it differently. It means recognizing that things you once blamed yourself for may not have been your fault. It means seeing patterns that once felt random. It means grieving the life you thought you had, the partner you thought you knew, and the version of the relationship you were trying so hard to protect. That's why these moments are so emotional. They're not just about learning something new. They're about reinterpreting your entire past through a new lens. Leaving after that realization is also not simple. That's another thing people often misunderstand. Recognizing abuse is one step. Leaving is another. And speaking publicly about it is another level entirely. Even when someone knows a relationship is harmful, leaving can be incredibly complicated. There may be fear. There may be guilt. There may be children involved. There may be financial concerns, religious expectations, community pressure, or the fear of being judged. There may still be love, hope, attachment, or the belief that things could get better. That's why Jessi's decision to not only leave, but also speak publicly about what she says happened is being seen as such a brave move. It takes courage to tell the truth when you know that truth will be questioned, analyzed, and discussed by strangers. The response to her interview also shows how deeply people connect to honesty, especially when it breaks through the illusion of perfection. Audiences today are becoming more skeptical of influencer culture. They know that social media often shows the highlight reel. They know that carefully curated content can hide real problems. So when someone like Jessi comes forward and says this is what was really happening behind the scenes, people pay attention. And not just because it's shocking, but because it feels real. In a digital world full of filters and branding, honesty stands out. For many people watching, Jessi's story may also feel deeply personal. Emotional abuse is one of those experiences that can be very hard to explain until you hear someone else describe it in a way that makes it click. A lot of survivors struggle because they don't have one dramatic event they can point to. They just know that over time they became anxious, uncertain, isolated, and disconnected from themselves. They know they started doubting their own memory, apologizing constantly, or feeling like they could never do anything right. When someone publicly describes those same patterns, it can be incredibly validating. It can help people realize they're not imagining things. It can help them understand that emotional abuse is real, even when it doesn't leave visible scars. Another important layer here is that emotional abuse can be especially hard for the public to understand when the other person appears charming, calm, or well-liked. In many abusive dynamics, the person causing harm is not obviously cruel in public. They may be charismatic. They may seem stable. They may know exactly how to present themselves to others. Meanwhile, the person being harmed may look emotional, stressed, reactive, or overwhelmed because they've been living under constant pressure. Outsiders may then misread the situation and assume the more emotional person is the problem. That's one of the most painful parts of emotional abuse. The victim often fears they won't be believed because the other person appears so convincing. Jessi speaking out matters because it challenges the idea that abuse has to look obvious to be real. This story also touches on how communities sometimes protect appearances more than people. In environments where marriage is treated as sacred, divorce can carry shame. In communities where family image is connected to morality, admitting dysfunction can feel taboo. In spaces where women are expected to be patient, forgiving, and endlessly committed, it can be difficult for someone to say this relationship is hurting me. Even if no one directly tells them to stay silent, the message can still be there. Stay strong. Keep the family together. Don't embarrass anyone. Don't give up. Don't make it public. Those messages can keep people trapped far longer than outsiders realize. That's why Jessi's story feels bigger than just a personal confession. It taps into a larger conversation about silence, image, and the hidden forms of harm that many people are taught to ignore. When she talks about emotional abuse, she's not only telling her own story, she's also pushing back against the systems that make it harder for people to name what's happening. She's challenging the idea that if something looks good on the outside, it must be good on the inside. She's challenging the idea that women should endure emotional harm to preserve an image. A lot of people have pointed out how important it is that she used clear language. Words like gaslighting, manipulation, and emotional abuse help people identify patterns. They help people understand that certain behaviors are not just bad communication or relationship problems. If someone is constantly making you question your reality, blaming you for their actions, minimizing your feelings, punishing honesty, or controlling the emotional climate of the relationship, that is not just a rough patch. Those patterns can be deeply harmful. Naming them matters because it gives people the ability to recognize them in their own lives. It's also significant that Jessi is sharing this after building a public identity in a space that often celebrates the very image her story now complicates. Publicly changing your own narrative is not easy. It means admitting that what people saw before was incomplete. It means revealing that the version of your life you shared did not reflect the whole truth. That can bring up shame, even when the person did nothing wrong. Survivors often feel embarrassed that they didn't see the signs sooner, or that they stayed as long as they did. But emotional abuse is designed to be confusing. It is designed to make people doubt themselves. It is designed to make leaving harder. That's why the shame does not belong to the person who survived it. It belongs to the person who created the harm. Another reason this interview matters is because it broadens the public conversation about domestic abuse. Too often, people only take abuse seriously when it becomes physical or explosive. But emotional abuse can be just as damaging. It can lead to anxiety, depression, self-doubt, isolation, and long-term trauma. It can affect the way someone parents, works, socializes, and trusts future partners. It can change the way someone makes decisions and the way they see themselves. Those are not small effects. And because emotional abuse is often harder to prove, survivors can end up feeling like they have to justify their pain. That's why public conversations like this are so important. They help people understand that abuse is not only physical. The invisible wounds matter too. Of course, when a story like this goes public, the reactions are often mixed. Some people immediately empathize. Some people feel validated. Some people start reflecting on their own experiences. Others become skeptical or uncomfortable. Some say we only know one side. Some minimize emotional abuse because it doesn't fit their narrow idea of what abuse looks like. Some get defensive because the story challenges a familiar image they've bought into. But even those reactions show why conversations like this are needed. They reveal how much misunderstanding still exists around emotional abuse and how many people still struggle to take it seriously. For people who have followed Jessi for a long time, this interview may completely change the way they see her public journey. Things that once looked sweet, normal, or aspirational may now feel different in hindsight. But the real takeaway should not be to obsessively reanalyze every old post or video. The value of Jessi's story is not in turning it into internet detective work. The value is in listening to what she's saying now and understanding the larger message. The message is that appearances can be deceiving. The message is that emotional abuse can exist inside relationships that look beautiful from the outside. The message is that speaking up takes real courage. What makes this moment especially powerful is that it connects influencer culture with abuse awareness in a way people don't always talk about. Usually, influencer conversations focus on trends, branding, drama, and content. Abuse conversations are treated as something separate, more private, more serious. But the truth is, these worlds overlap all the time. People build brands around their relationships, their families, their homes, and their marriages. That means when something is wrong behind the scenes, the pressure to keep performing happiness can become part of the trap. The relationship is no longer just personal. It's public. There's an audience. There's an expectation. There may even be money attached to maintaining the image. Jessi's story highlights how social media can make it even harder to tell the truth. There's also a broader conversation here about what strength really looks like. Women are often praised for being patient, forgiving, resilient, and willing to make things work. But sometimes that praise becomes harmful. It can teach people to tolerate what they should never have to tolerate. It can turn suffering into something that looks noble. It can make silence feel like virtue. Jessi's story pushes back on that. It suggests that strength is not always staying. Sometimes strength is leaving. Sometimes strength is naming the harm. Sometimes strength is refusing to keep pretending for the comfort of others. At the end of the day, Jessi Draper's Call Her Daddy interview is resonating because it's about much more than one ex-husband or one marriage. It's about